All right. Welcome to The Secret to Flying Safely. Brian is going to join us in just a moment. It's amazing that so many of you are here tonight. And I'm just thrilled that we get to talk about this. This topic is so close to my heart. And you got my voice now, right? Okay, good. All right, good. All right, you guys, let me just start before I bring Brian in by talking about why tonight is so important, right? I think all the pilots here want to fly safely. I mean, I know you do. I see the numbers on shows like, Blanco Lirio or the Air Safety Institute or Pilot Debrief. I mean, often we're looking at things that go wrong out there and we're saying to ourselves, how can I not end up like that person, right? Maybe it's you want to go practice your landings or get better at the low, the low speed edges of the envelope, or you want to get better with your coordination or your emergency procedures or whatever you think it is. But I'm here to tell you that I don't think those are the things that will get you at the end of the day to the level of safety that you're looking for. And sometimes when I lecture, I'll ask GA pilots. And by the way, for anybody that found yourself here and you don't know who I am, I'm Jason. And I host The Finer Points. And you can find out all sorts of stuff about us at learnthefinerpoints.com. But when I'm out lecturing, I generally ask pilots this question because I think it's good food for thought. If you had somebody that you really care about, somebody you love, I think of like my 14-year-old daughter, and she calls me, let's say, and says, "Hey, Dad, I'm going to fly tonight from Los Angeles to Reno, and I'm going to come and see you." If she wasn't with me, if she tells me she's going on Southwest or American or United or any number of these commercial operators, I don't even bat an eye about whether or not she's going to get there safely. I take it on faith. I mean, it's just an assumption. The airlines have done such a good job at sort of bracketing toward perfection in safety. However, if you contemplate that same scenario and it's some guy named Randy who owns a 170, how do you think I feel about my daughter jumping in the plane with this guy that owns a 170? I don't know him from Adam. I just know what I know about GA, and it makes me uncomfortable. I would have to interview and probably fly with that person a few times. So we know like what the state of safety is. And like I mentioned, we're watching these debrief shows and we're trying to achieve a higher level for all of us. I'm trying to achieve it for myself. I'm trying to achieve it for my students. Everybody here is trying to achieve it. And so what the talk tonight is about is let's not reinvent the wheel. Let's look at who does this better than anybody. And that is the professional operators in the United States of America. Do this better than anybody. And they achieve those higher levels of safety better than anybody. And we're simply going to look at what they do and then emulate it and try to distill it into something that we can really adopt in our own flying. And I'll tell you that when I had that comfortable feeling, or the feeling you would have if someone said they were flying an airliner, they're going to get a ticket on the airlines, and they're going to get there safely. If I ask a room of pilots, why is that? Often they'll say to me, well, that 737's got de-icing equipment and it's got 2 turbine engines and it's got with speed brakes, and it starts going off about the airplane or the equipment. And I think that's a bit of a fallacy. That's a bit of a trick, because anybody that flies complex equipment would probably tell you that the more complex the machine is, the more difficult it is in some ways, right? The more opportunities for failure, the more you have to understand everything there is about the machine. It's counterintuitive, but if you put a Cessna 152, a Cessna 172, a 182, a 206, and a 210 on the ramp, probably people wouldn't say that the 152 is the safest plane, but that is true. The 152 has the best accident rate of all those aircraft. It's that KISS principle, keep it simple, stupid. So what is it then? If it's not the more complicated machine, what is it that is driving those high levels of safety? And it's really a 3-step process. And the reason it works is because the company has lived on. The company survives the accidents. And so what the commercial operators have been doing for decades is sort of bracketing toward perfection. When an accident occurs, when something happens and a plane goes down, that operator, and in fact, all other operators in the industry at a certain level, will look at what happened and look at it very carefully. They'll study it. Some cases, they bring the airplane into a hangar and rebuild it. They look at black boxes and data recorders, and they analyze what went wrong. That's step one. You have to analyze what went wrong. Step 2, they develop a procedure that would prevent the possibility of that accident ever occurring again. And part 3, this is probably the hardest part for us and maybe the most important, they make that procedure redundant and they force compliance. Meaning if you fail to do that procedure, you could lose your job. Through that process, the commercial operators over the last 40 years have been able to reduce the fatal accident rate by 85%. It's literally once and done in the United States for the most part. There's like a missetting your flaps accident that happened twice in the 90s. There's a couple like thunderstorm wind shear accidents that were maybe repeats, but by and large, through that process, we don't repeat accidents. It's once and done at the professional level typically. So what I want to talk about tonight is how we can adopt those procedures and employ them. And before we bring in Brian, I just wanted to show you guys, for those of you that don't know, we have a ground school app, and I'm going to show you how to find all the procedures that I teach, whether or not you buy the app. But I do want you to know that tonight and tonight only, we're offering $100 on the ground school app. So if you click that little download the app button below your viewer window, you'll get the best deal we've ever offered. But here on the flight side, we've got ground training over here, flight training right here. You'll see standard operating procedures right here. And these are all the SOPs that I teach. And back to the idea that I'm not reinventing the wheel. I didn't invent most of this stuff. I'm just preaching that we should adopt it the way Part 135 single pilot operators adopt it. And if you are somebody who doesn't want to buy the app, but you want to see what these procedures are, I've added a free checklist here in the resources section. So just download the app, bypass the payment screen, and this is free. And that's a checklist for you to sort of go through those procedures that I was just showing you here, all these procedures, and make sure that you don't miss them in your own flying. And early in my instructor career, many of my friends were going on to the airlines, and I spent a lot of time prepping them for their first job in aviation beyond teaching, which was typically like a cargo job. Single pilot, Part 135. And that's important because crew procedures are slightly different than single pilot procedures. But the main message here is there's no point in reinventing the wheel. There are procedures in place that will act as a safety net and create, like, remove the possibility of you making certain mistakes. So that part is obvious. Now, I've invited a good friend, Brian Schiff, to come and join us. Brian is a flight instructor. He's been a flight instructor for 38 years. He's also an airline pilot, which is, part of the reason we brought him in tonight is that he can help us understand what those airline operation manuals look like and help us figure out how to better distill these procedures into our own life. So anyway, without further ado here, I'm going to bring Brian on stage. And hello, Brian. How's it going?
Hey, Jason. Hey, how you doing?
I'm good. Thanks.
Awesome.
For my part, standard operating procedures in my world are, pretty straightforward. Something like a fun example, something like the pre-flight walk, the final walk around, right? You do a whole pre-flight and you go through the whole pre-flight and take off the fuel caps and the dipsticks and hopefully you do everything. But at the end of the day, that one standard procedure, before I sit down in the airplane, I walk around the whole airplane and I just look and make sure I didn't do anything wrong. Even something as simple as that gives us that redundancy in GA. And, as I look at the accident reports, that one procedure would probably catch most accidents that are caused by bad pre-flights in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I agree. Pilots need to take a look at the big picture and step back. So one of those things for me is, okay, get away from the airplane, get back and look at the big picture. If you're standing too close to the tree, you can't see the forest, right? It's blocking the whole thing.
Right.
And so I'll typically do that when I'm teaching students. I have them do a final walk around. I like to step back and look at the whole airplane, and you can see, couldn't tell when I was doing my walk around that the airplane is sitting like that.
Yeah.
Or something like that. But I think your 3 steps are right on the mark. I mean, you said reviewing accidents. We're here. I mean, everybody watching right now is here because they want to be safer. And one of my favorite flight instructors and one of my favorite fathers actually taught me, and he always told me the number one rule. I'll tell you the secret to safety: don't crash.
Your dad's a wise man.
Yeah. So how are we going to go and make that happen? That's what we're talking about.
Yeah.
And I think it's okay. One of the things is that you need to have a little bit of fear. It's okay to have just a tiny bit of fear, because that makes you ask yourself, what are the threats? And that's one of the newer airline policies and SOPs that we have now. Is our pre-flight briefing isn't, I'm going to fly this heading after takeoff and this altitude, and then I'm going to do the blah, 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 all the things that are normal. We don't brief that because it kind of ad nauseum. There was a change in philosophy, and now what we brief are, the first thing I ask my first officer is, what are your threats today? And what is going to get us? Because it's usually the one you don't see that gets you. So let's talk about what we're concerned about. Well, it's nighttime. Haven't flown at night in a while. There's mountains over there that are invisible. If it's daytime, we don't talk about night issues. So we look at the threats that are there. And I think it's threat and error management. So the threats and the mistakes that we make, those are the things that are going to get us. So we need to manage those things. We need to trap them. And you can trap them by doing these SOPs, like you said. The redundancy is huge. So you said study accidents, and why do we do that? Yeah, study accidents, because, and I think a lot of us do that. And there are a lot, be careful what you hear when the internet rapid response teams get out there and talk about an accident, because you just don't know everything. We don't know what we don't know yet. It takes a long time to learn the real facts. But I had a friend come to my door one time, and he just stopped by to say hello, and we're chatting. He's a neighbor, and I noticed he had a medicine bag hanging from his belt, with a tube going in to some port. And he admitted that he was receiving, and it was constantly feeding him chemo for cancer treatment. And I thought, oh, wow, that's horrible. And I wanted to give him some kind of, uplifting story. But instead, the first thing that comes to my mind is, how did you know you had it?
Yeah, right.
Why? Because I don't want it to happen to me.
Sure.
And I want to be looking out for that same thing. And I think that's why we study accidents. But we need to see what went wrong and get the real answer. And then involve some procedures that we come up with. And even I can sit in an airline cockpit and point to you and describe about a dozen accidents. That's why we have this ground proximity warning. And this is why we have DME hold. And this is all the accidents that we've had led to this equipment.
Exactly. And, and I just want to pause there for a second too, because I don't want people to give that short shrift, because consider this. There are many, many days where I'm in my office, out even flying in the same environment where this happens, and somebody will come in and say, "Did you hear about that crash in Fremont today?"
Oof.
Today, the day that I was out there. And I say, no, I didn't hear about it. Like, how would I hear about it?
Yeah.
And I think so that's one problem. I think one problem for GA pilots is that there isn't a giant, and maybe there's a big NTSB response, but it's not like with the airlines where they're rebuilding the plane in the hangar and it's on the evening news every night and the whole world knows about it. Without the Air Safety Institute and Blanco Lirio and some of those other people, we might not know about it. So I think pilots, like you said, should not worry about seeming afraid or whatever. They should look at what's going on out there and not feel bad about gawking. Or I have some pilots say, like, "Oh, I don't know, I kind of quietly at night, I go, and what I do is I look at accidents, like as if it's some thing they shouldn't be doing." And my first thought is like, high five, great. That's step one. If you don't know what's happening, you can't fix it.
Yeah, no, it's great to study accidents, because you look at some of the times you look at an accident and you look at the reports. And I encourage people to go look at the NTSB docket. You can look at the actual facts that are there. Be careful. Sometimes you'll see things that are unpleasant, but you'll see that, oh my gosh, this pilot was doing something I do all the time.
Yeah.
You hear about, I was teaching my son his instrument rating in a 182 that got taken out of commission because of a prop strike. First thing I want to know is, how did the prop strike happen? Well, it hit a tow bar.
Yeah. There you go.
So,
like standardizing, by the way, the whole KISS principle of keep it simple, stupid, and standardizing can be as minute as you want it to be. Because the first thing I thought of when you said that is that my mentor, Richard, never let me let go of the tow bar unless it was disconnected from the nose wheel. So even if I was in the middle of pulling the 172 out and I realized, I don't know, I had to move a chock. So I had to let go of the tow bar just for a second to go move a chock. I had to disconnect it from there was never a time where my hand came off the tow bar.
That's an SOP.
Mentor, Richard. Yeah, it's an SOP. It's just a standard operating procedure, right? And guess what? So far, I haven't hit any tow bars with props.
Right.
but it can be that detailed, you know?
Yeah, and that's really what we're talking about. I mean, I inadvertently teach my students a lot of things that they're doing, and they don't really realizing that I'm building an overlap in. Like I make them pull the airplane out by the propeller hubs out of the parking spot enough to inspect the entire diameter of the tire.
Yeah.
Are we really
Yeah.
inspecting the tire, or am I keeping them from attempting to taxi out of that parking spot with the tail tied down? Because we got a little redundancy
That's a
there.
curveball for sure.
Yeah, but and another one that I'll use is when I have a student setting for a run up. Okay, so we're given procedures that we got to do.
Right.
We have to do a run up. We're told
Yeah.
what RPM to do it.
Yeah.
We're told what the max drop can be, what the difference between the max can be, but we're not given a lot of guidance on the technique to use to do the run up. So
Right.
giving flight reviews, and you probably see them too, you'll see all kinds of people doing their run up in all kinds of different ways. Like while they're taxiing to the run up pad, I've had students ride the brakes, add power. I've never done this.
Right.
Add power and do the run up while they're taxiing. Well, I discourage that. You should do nothing while you're taxiing, and that should be one of your SOPs. Save everything. And my dad taught me this too. If I tried to do anything, he'd smack me. And I think we called that. You had a term for that. I forget.
I call it training by trauma.
Training by trauma. Yeah. Well, he used a rolled up sectional, and now, gosh, if you hit me with an iPad now, that would probably hurt. But
sure. Hey, one thing for real quick. I know there's people looking for the checklist that I mentioned. I think to see it that quickly, you're going to have to tap the gear icon in the top right and update the content from the server. Sorry, just so you know. You just tap this gear icon up here in the top right. I see a lot more stuff than you see, but eventually you're going to get to this thing called update content from server. Just click that and it'll pull down the absolute latest. I just put that in there this morning, so my apologies, but that's where you're going to find that.
Anyway. That's a cool idea. And I encourage people to look at that and develop their own, what works for them. It may not be perfect for them. So pilots need to develop their own techniques for how they're going to do it. Now, don't do the run up while you're taxiing. Don't do anything while you're taxiing. The only thing that really has to be done is a gyro check, right?
Yeah.
If you're flying IFR, do everything else when you get to the run up pad, set the brakes. And then when I have my students add power for the run up, I give them a little game. Like, why don't you look outside, see if you can guess where 1800 RPM is or 1700 RPM.
By sound. Yeah.
Yeah, and so are they learning the engine and learning what the sounds are? Yeah, but again, my redundancy here, my ulterior motive is, if that aircraft starts rolling while they're adding power, they're going to see it.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's one of the things that you've seen airplanes taxiing in other airplanes during a run up, and that will prevent it. You're just not holding the brakes enough. Staring at the tachometer is not going to tell you that the airplane is rolling.
Right.
So developing those kinds of habits from, like, if you're a flight instructor watching this, start working that kind of stuff into your shtick. But
yeah, 100%. And I think it's important too for folks to realize it's like a living document. So it can be daunting, right? Like, all these things that Brian and I are mentioning that we were taught or that we do or whatever, even if you go into our app and you learn everything that's in there, it's not comprehensive, right? If tomorrow there's an accident, or well, this happened in 2007, if there's an accident where somebody lines up on the wrong runway with co-joined approach ends and takes off, maybe you want to add a procedure that's called out loud where you check your magnetic compass or you check your heading indicator before you add power for takeoff and just hear yourself verify that it matches the runway. But my point is, if you're listening to this, don't feel daunted that there's no way you're going to have it all. If you started with one SOP and just said, okay, I'm always going to do nothing when I taxi because that's the only thing I remember Brian said. Well, there's the first SOP in your whole routine, and you'll just build from there.
Yeah, and build on it, but do it every time. You said something about forcing compliance. Now the airlines do it like, if you don't do it, you're fired. If you don't follow, how do 15 or 16,000 pilots where I work fly together without ever having flown together? And we make it work because we know what to expect. So fly like the other guy is going to expect you to fly. Fly like ATC is going to expect you to fly. If you're flying single pilot, give yourself the other guy and fly like you will expect yourself to fly. And I've heard you even make reference to making out loud call outs, because you're involving another one of your seven senses. When you make a call out orally, your ears hear it. Yeah. And that's just one more reinforcement.
Yeah, 100%. Redundancy is a really hard one in the single pilot world, and also forcing compliance is really tough. It's so tough, honestly, forcing compliance in an unregulated environment like Part 91, that I've started saying to people that I don't think it's a matter of if there's a certain pressure that could push you over the edge. It's really just like, how much pressure would it take? Like, there is an amount of pressure that would cause you to blow off all your SOPs. And the trick is knowing what that is. And in an unregulated environment like ours, it's a very difficult thing to manage. Maybe we can come back to it.
Yeah,
But
and I can prove that.
are,
If you're sitting down there on a runway in Nicaragua and you see people with machine guns coming at your airplane, are you going to do a run up? Are you going to go?
Well, I mean, I'll give you a quick example, like of something that happened, you know, one of my, and there are many flights, by the way, where this has come up for me that has caused me to come to this conclusion. But one time I was speaking for AOPA in Camarillo, and it's a nice, easy flight down to Camarillo. It was beautiful. It was forecast to be beautiful weather. I was in San Francisco at the time, and so just a couple hours down the coast. I think I had a student coming with me. We were flying like a Piper Archer or something. And the morning of the flight, it was far windier than forecasts down there, and there was a SIGMET for winds. Now, I didn't leave myself any time. I had to be there that day to do the lecture. And it was for AOPA. I don't think anyone's missed an AOPA lecture since 1939. You know, it's like I wasn't going to be the first guy to ever miss an AOPA lecture. So like the amount of pressure in that moment was really untenable. I mean, fortunately, I got a good break and the winds were not as strong as forecast. But that was the last time I ever planned a flight when it really, really mattered, where I didn't have a day on either side.
Yeah, leaving yourself an out or a backup plan, room on each side. Absolutely. I teach that I teach the AOPA Rusty Pilot seminars, and I talk about that, leaving yourself an out. I saw that a guy, Jonathan, on there, he posted Spidey sense is one of the 7 senses. And you know what? Yes. So when you hear your Spidey sense, or when the hair on the back of your neck stands up, or your gut feeling, something's telling you that something's just not right. Listen to it, because more often than not, you're trying to talk yourself out of something, and your internal forces you'll argue with yourself, and you'll convince yourself it's okay to go, even though you might have this weird gut feeling. So listen to your gut.
Yeah, that's absolutely a good one. And that's, you know, there's that 3 strikes rule. It's a bit like that, where if, you know, 3 things happen, you can't quite define, but you know what they are if they're you know. You're looking for your glasses, but they're on your head. You left your coffee cup on the hood of the car, you know, and you get to the hangar, but the keys are still in your office. It's like, maybe those are 3 strikes. Maybe today is the day to go flying.
I'd never fly. 3 strikes. No, you're right though. And that's you got to evaluate yourself, whether or not you're ready to do it. There are so many, I mean, we couldn't possibly cover all of the SOPs I'd like to talk about in an hour, but I am good, and I'm planning on your help with this, working on a PFOM, a personal flight operations manual that I'm putting out for general aviation pilots, for single pilot IFR, that you can kind of use like we do at the airlines. Make it your policy manual, and don't have to break. And
that's fantastic. That's something I really want to talk to you about. And before we do that, though, and I have a little timer that my marketing people gave to me, and they want me to remind you that all these SOPs are here in the flight side of our ground school app. And I want to take a quick moment and this is what's in here. And so what Brian's about to go into is a bit more than this. These are standard operating procedures. So it's a pre-taxi briefing. It's taxi turns while you're taxiing, a pre-takeoff briefing, why we do takeoff call-outs, what is the Lindbergh reference, flow checks and checklists for every climb, level off, and descent, clearing turns, gumps, and all that sort of stuff. It's the kind of, and then of course there's that free checklist, if you guys found it, that you can use to verify that you did those things for each phase of flight. But those are the SOPs that I was taught by my mentor, that I would coach my colleagues early in my career as they were going on to airlines. This is what I would give to them. But to be totally honest, I've never flown off an operations manual. I'm a career flight instructor. I don't fly for the airlines. And I would love for you to share any insights you have into what an actual company operations manual looks like. And I suppose I would start by asking you, when you go to a new company, so let me see if I can get this question out right. So these SOPs for me are fundamental in the way I fly. And fortunately, I'm always flying light piston airplanes, usually singles, sometimes twins. So they're different, but they're not that different, right? It's like, it's an engine, there's a flap system, right? Like as it is now, whether I'm in a brand new, a brand new Cirrus, or if I'm in an old 310, or if I'm in a Citabria, for the most part, my SOPs work, right? I get to the plane and I keep it simple, stupid. I do the same thing in the same way, unless it's proven to me that I can't. And that's true in a DA-42 also, even as weird as that one is, right? It's my procedures still work. But when you get hired by a new airline, how do you take on an operations manual that's what, maybe 1,100 pages? You know what I mean?
It's
Like when you
1,100
move
page
from,
sleeping pill. You put it under your pillow and osmosis. And,
well,
no,
it's like, so I just want to help folks get our heads around what we're about to see and how we can start to build something like this for GA, and something that would be
sure,
meaningful, because it's bigger than SOPs, right? I mean, of course,
sure.
your airline has SOPs, but the ops manual is like 1,200 pages or something, right?
Oh, it's like 3,000 or 4,000 pages. Now that it's a digital document with hyperlinks and everything like that, it's made it much easier to use, and something that I'm going to pattern the one I'm designing right now after, that you can keep it as in ForeFlight, or just as a PDF on your iPad or any tablet that you're using, and access it with hyperlinks to whatever phase of flight. I'll show you in shortly here, but I also like your input on it. And I think so. You asked, when you go to an airline you're hired, or a new company, the first thing that they put you through is indoctrination training. So when you go to, and the short term for that is Indoc, usually a week or two of pure Indoc. How do we run our company? And you go through the highlights of that policy manual. We go through the SOPs, and then it's reinforced in the training, in the simulator, of how we're going to do things. We practice it over and over again. When I sit down, like when I went from the MD-80 captain to an Airbus 321 captain, same thing as if I went from a 172 to going to fly a Bonanza. I'm going to sit in the flight deck. That is an on-ground cockpit procedures trainer. You can go sit in that airplane, don't start the engine, and go through everything and figure out. So what we do is flows. We do a flow.
And I don't want to blow off the point that you just said. For everybody listening, if I heard you right, you're talking about essentially dry time, going to the airplane when it's not running, sitting down in the cockpit and going through all your checklists. If you're a GA pilot, that will save you a lot of money in training. Those planes are sitting out there on the ramp, and even if you don't have a lesson, you can just go get the binder and sit in the plane and never start it. But make sure you go through everything. When the engine's running and your CFI's Hobbs meter is running is not the time to ask about the run-up checklist.
That's what I was going to say. You read and study differently when you have, as Rod Machado put it, a runaway Hobbs meter. You tend to rush things a little bit, and I don't like when people rush. So if you sit in the airplane, and it's free, I don't know anybody that charges. If you run an airplane for 3 hours, and you, for an hour before you go fly it, sit in it with the Hobbs off, the engine off, nothing, you're not being built for that. That's some powerful training time. So go through the flows, make your own flow. I mean, when I teach, I have the backwards Z7, I got a Z scan, I got these things that I've named, and I don't want to go through that because everybody needs to develop their own. But when, for example, you lose an engine, I do a backwards 7. We start at the fuel selector, work our way up, go across, and it's a real 7, but we're drawing it backwards. And so that's a flow. And then after we've done that, we go to the checklist.
And you know, back to the point about single pilot, I mean, that's the redundancy. So you'll see anyone who looks, and Brian, you know this about the way that I teach it, but it's like there's always the same flow backed up by a written checklist for climb, cruise, descent, and cruise again.
Yeah, exactly.
And in a single pilot world, that flow is extremely important for anybody that's watching, because in a 2-crew environment, Brian can be flying the plane and say climb checklist, right? And someone else can read it and he can hear it, and there's just redundancy built into the equation.
But see, here's the thing.
And
this is what general aviation pilots can take from that. All I got to do is say climb checklist, and that's really all the GA pilot has to do as well, is to say it. That's going to be the action they're going to need to complete. But there's a trigger for that, and climb checklist is the second half of a sentence. The first half is flaps up. So we go, climb thrust, blah blah blah, gear up, positive rate, gear up, flaps flaps 1, and then flaps up after takeoff checklist. And so there's a trigger for when we do the after takeoff checklist every time. So for a GA pilot, it might be out of 1,000 feet after takeoff checklist.
I don't know, but 1,000 feet AGL is a good one for the climb.
Yeah, some kind of trigger. And I was going to show you when I share our excerpts of our policy manual and the SOPs where I work, you'll see that there's triggers and flows. And I kind of laughed at that at first, but a trigger will cause you to do something, and then that something is a flow. It could be as simple as the trigger being passing 17,500 feet in a climb, flow, set 2992 on the altimeter.
Yeah. That's, and I also want to, and I'm not sure if you and I diverge on this, but I'll just say that this because this is my philosophy on flows in a GA airplane. So not a complex airline cockpit or anything, but in a GA airplane, I would encourage people as much as possible to keep the flows the same. And I've definitely seen folks that have written GA training manuals that I think they come from the airline world. I won't name any companies, but anyway. So, but there's like 10 different flows, and my feeling is the KISS principle. Like, you don't need 10 flows, and there shouldn't be a flow for takeoff on a Sunday, and if I lose an engine with my shoes untied, and then there's a different flow for this and a different flow for that, because you're never going to remember the flows. It's a small cockpit, just lightning bolt, or 7 up, 7 down. The one you mentioned works too. Or the lightning bolt from the mag compass to the heading indicator to the engine gauges and switches to the fuel, and then down to the floor. And if there's cowl flaps, great, you'll see it. If it's a low wing, you change the tanks. If there's lights to turn off, you'll turn them off. If there's a mixture to lean, you'll lean. But the most important thing is you're taking a guess first, and then you're picking up a checklist and verifying it second. And I think in GA, a lot of people miss that redundancy. They'll just pick up and read a checklist, because to me, it seems like it's been inherited from a 2-crew environment, and in the process lost its value. It's become a do list.
Oh, I totally agree. I've seen so many pilots just thinking, okay, I'm flying a 172. It's my 172. I do fly nothing but a 172. I get in this airplane. I know I can start it. Now, I like to teach people, hey, get the engine started without a checklist. Get it done. Because it gets them thinking, what do I need? I need fuel. I need ignition. I need electricity. But then we got to do the checklist. And so pilots become so complacent about the checklist, because I know this airplane. I fly it all the time. You just can't do that. You need to be disciplined. It takes discipline to do that. And it takes only a matter of seconds to pick up a checklist. And don't have a 10, just like you said, not too many scans or flows. Don't have 25, 30 items on a checklist. Have the killer items on a checklist. That's just like 3 or 4 things on each.
I know.
You're up and flaps up after takeoff done.
I know. It drives me crazy every time I see climb airspeed 85 FMS tuned to my destination.
Inhale,
and
exhale.
open. It's like, that's not climb checklist stuff. It's really not.
Right, exactly. So don't have all the details that you're going to do, and you do it out of habit, like breathing in and out, like blinking your eyes. You don't have to put that on a checklist.
Right. I agree.
And gumps is a good one. I think gumps and cigars, I use those same too. I also think having mnemonics at certain times is great.
Right. So you just brought up something else, and I want people to know that the most important part in a single pilot environment when we're talking about redundancy on these procedures, because just to keep us oriented, or for anybody that just came in, we're describing a 3-part process that works really well for professional operators. They first identify an accident that caused a problem. They create a procedure that prevents the problem from ever occurring again. They make the procedure redundant, and they force compliance. And in that world of redundancy, single pilots are at a huge disadvantage. I always say, like, we have to be like camels in the desert. Like, we're going to only survive if we store, look for every opportunity for redundancy. And so Brian was talking about flow checks, which are a guess pattern. Can be like a 7 shape up from the floor, a 7 shape down to the floor, a lightning bolt shape. It can be any sort of shape. And it's meant for you to kind of shake the tree and wait for loose apples to fall off, so to speak. You're just kind of looking at it going, is there anything I need to do? Is there anything I need to do? Is there anything I need to do? But it's a guess. And the fact that it's a guess is important, because in a second, you're going to pick up some written checklist. You're going to verify you didn't miss anything. And that's where the redundancy is. And so what Brian just mentioned, for anybody that missed it, are acronyms like GUMPS, which is a pre-landing acronym, or cigars or cigar tips or whatever for your run-up, something like that. But it's the same idea. You have this word instead of a flow. GUMPS is, gas, undercarriage mixture, power props, pumps, seatbelt security switches, whatever you do. It's some word that helps you guess. And then again, you check it. And I just want to also, just spending so much time in the right seat, I know what people are going to be tempted once you learn the acronym or the flow or other mnemonic devices, you will be tempted to blow off that written checklist. And that's the discipline that Brian's talking about right now, that you have to have.
If you do it eventually, that's the important part. But also, we know that ATC has, I'm convinced that they've got a light right next to their radar that tells them when you're about to do something very important, and that light comes on, and that's when they give you another clearance, or they talk to you, give you an instruction.
Yeah.
And that it's like they know
Right.
that's when it happens. And so because of that, I kind of incorporate that into my teaching. Like if I'm on a base, like whatever I'm teaching in, if there's for example, there's a normal time that someone puts the gear down, like when they're down in a beam.
Yeah.
Put the gear down in a complex airplane.
Yeah.
So that's the time I'm going to ask them, okay, so what's the glide path on this PAPI or VASI? And what rate of descent are you going to shoot for on final? And I start asking them these questions right before that normal time when they put the gear down.
Yeah.
And I tell you, about 50% of the time, I can distract them into forgetting to put the gear down. So the checklist would fix that.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's, you should really in a single pilot world learn to develop this redundancy through flow checks and mnemonic devices and acronyms, and then you absolutely have to cross check it against a written checklist. And it's not for the day that everything goes right. It's for the day that things aren't going right. Yeah.
And so there's another one. You refer to Richard about as much as I refer to my dad, because he taught me to fly, and he's been my role model. But he always asked the question, who is the safest driver on the road? It's the one with the cop in the rearview mirror. So pretend you've got an FAA inspector on your jump seat or in the back of your airplane. Yeah. That's what I teach my co-pilots. I'm like, if you're trying to make a decision and you're hem-hawing, I just ask, well, what would your decision be if the FAA was standing here watching you? Yeah. And then it becomes obvious.
Right.
It should always be obvious.
Right. Yeah. And I think, that whole, the idea that we're going to figure this stuff out ahead of time. I mean, this is where the professional operators are at. This and the fact that the compliance is so easily forced is the huge advantage. Yeah. Sometimes if we were all in a room and I could ask any of these people that are here, are you an airline pilot? Somebody would say, yeah, I'm an airline pilot. And I always like to say, well, can you start an approach if the weather is 6 inches below minimums at your destination?
Yeah.
No. It's like, you cannot, you may not, you are not legally allowed to, you're going to divert, right? If it's 1 inch below, right? It just can't be below. There's these black and white lines that have been decided ahead of time. And if A, then this, if B, then that.
And you know what? GA pilots are allowed to do the same thing.
Yeah.
And that's what we're talking about. Have that same discipline. If I have a crosswind limit of 15 knots and I do my math and I see the crosswind component is 16 knots, it's a no-go. Don't talk yourself into going. 16 is no-go, 15 is go. And what's your motivation here? If 16 is okay, then one more knot, 17 should be okay. Yeah. And then if one knot doesn't make a difference, then 18 should be okay. And this is the creeping normalcy that we're talking about.
Yeah.
Make it black and white.
Yeah. And to build on that point, because I agree with you 100%. Want to remind people too that the one rule the thing you can't do is change your SOP on the day you're flying. Like, even if it's right. And the example I always think of is I was on the ground at San Carlos one morning with a student, really sharp guy. And it was, I can't remember how low it was. It was like 300 or 400 overcast. So it was pretty low. We get that marine layer, 300-400 overcast and maybe like a half mile in mist. Yeah. And the approach back into San Carlos is 580. That's as low as you can go, I think. Or at the time it was 580. Anyway, I have an SOP, a takeoff minimum, that says I don't depart the airport unless the weather is high enough for me to turn around and shoot the approach right back into that same airport.
Yeah.
But my student, being a clever guy, was like, well, wait a minute now. Because he'd always been fine with that SOP, before. But on this day, he was like, well, wait a minute. He really wanted to go. He's like, we have San Francisco right here. We've got Oakland. We got San Jose. We got all these airports. Why don't we just go to another airport if we lose our engine? And he gives me this. So I asked him, okay, then what's your SOP? And he invented something. Well, if there's an ILS within 20 nautical miles of my departure airport and the weather's higher than the ILS, came up with this whole thing. And my answer was, great. Okay, those are our new SOPs.
And so that's finding an out. And that's what I'm trying to incorporate into the SOPs I'm writing.
And when we meet next week, then we'll adopt that, but we're not flying today, right? Like, you can't fly on the day you change it, even if changing it is the right thing, because of what you just said. That
exactly. And I saw a comment by Philip. He said you're allowed to slow down, and that's one of my passions. Is that you have two speeds, slow or screw up. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Slow down, take it easy. And even if you're IFR and you get a clearance void time, don't allow that to rush. You can request a different void if not off by time. You can tell ATC when they say clear for an immediate takeoff, Cessna on a half-mile final, you can say negative, I'll wait.
Yeah, exactly. Right. Yeah, 100%.
That's okay to do.
Yeah, and so I'm just thinking what we got through, and I would really love to see some of the operations manual. But so for folks at home who are trying to build this stuff, keep in mind it's a living document. Maybe you start by listing your personal minimums, and maybe your personal minimums are just the ones your CFI gave you: headwind, crosswind, ceiling, and visibility. Maybe that's all you have to start, 4 of those. You're going to get the Finer Points Ground School app, so you'll know the SOPs that Jason teaches. But Brian, show us what a company that has survived decades of accidents and built a bigger and bigger and bigger operations manual. What does something like that look like? If we're
sure, just to take a quick peek, and this is what I'm modeling mine after as well. This is a flight operations manual, and you'll see that it's dated 28 March is the last revision. That proves it's a living, breathing document. I mean, we are constantly getting updates to these things, and so it's constantly changing. This is the front page. We have a link, and everything's hyperlinked. So there's a reference, fast reference links that you can get to by tapping on that. Those are the things that you might need right away. And basically it's broken down by each phase of flight. And so that's the policy manual that I'm kind of trying to base a general aviation, like a personal flight operations manual on, that I'm working on right now. And it's not going to be complex and long and 1,400 pages. It's going to start with, like you said, and you can do it yourself, a personal minimums checklist. That's what you're starting with. And that's like your operations specifications is what the airline would call it. What are you allowed to fly in? Right. So we need to have that. What is the minimum weather? What's the worst kind of weather? Maybe if under certain conditions, if your runway is short or narrow, then maybe the wind should be a little bit different. So I'm working on this. But what it's also going to include is some of the SOPs. And this is like the flow guide. What you see in green is a trigger. And the trigger is, in this example, after fueling is complete and 10 minutes prior to gate departure. So it's telling you where you are. But when you get those 2 things met, each pilot accomplishes these things. Now, obviously, with single pilot, we're going to have just 1 column. And then you do a checklist. Another trigger is after receiving, this is from a flight attendant. You're not going to get that in GA, but when everything's ready to go, this is what you're going to do. The next trigger could be when you're number 1 for takeoff. That's a trigger. When we're at that point, we do these things. It's very simple. But if you do this every time and routinely, it will come up, and you can modify it to what works for you and your aircraft. And then after flap and slat retraction, here's what we're going to do. Climbing through 10,000 is a trigger. We're just doing a couple things. This is just an example of the triggers and flows that we do at the airline, but everybody studies this. It's like a script.
And so all of this for you at this point in your career is committed to memory, the triggers and flows?
The flows are committed to memory, but then we have checklists.
Yeah, that you back up.
Because you're going to miss something on a flow. 10,000 hours on the MD-80, I invariably miss something. When I do a checklist, I'm like, oh, there's something I missed. And that's what it's for. It's to catch that. It's to trap those errors.
Yeah. And that seems like a great way to learn it and approach it, just phase of flight. So like if you were seeing that operations manual for the first time and you had the daunting task of memorizing all those flows, is that how you'd approach it? Like, I'm going phase of flight 1 at a time?
Well, when I have to memorize the flows, I look at the list of things. I actually have a poster of the cockpit, and I circle all in red ink those things I'm supposed to touch. Then I just touch them. If I can assign a shape to that or a kind of a flow to it, I will. But basically, or an acronym, but basically, don't hesitate to think as well. I'm about to take off. What do I need?
Yeah.
When I flew a 135 operator, every time we took the runway clear for takeoff, that was a trigger. We didn't call it a trigger, but clear for takeoff, we'd all look down. Spoilers, flaps, trim.
Yeah.
Spoilers retracted, flaps are set for takeoff, and the trim is set for takeoff.
Right.
But we also have a section that, we do things. We don't always shoot RNAV approaches. So basically we have this decision tree, can I shoot this approach? And we can make this for general aviation for the equipment that you have in your airplane.
Yeah.
And here's the approach. Can I shoot this approach? And, it's all hyperlinked, and it'll be, kind of nice to do. You have plenty of time. If you think you might be shooting an approach, you usually know well in advance.
Yeah.
Stuff like that. There's also there's an advisory circular out that has a kind of a sample briefing card in it, and you can modify yours from it. AC 9173B. It's been out a while, but it's actually got a sample briefing card in the back. This is a lot. We don't do this anymore. Like I said, we kind of switched to briefing what are your threats, and then what are the big ticket items. So that's pretty much it on that. There's a big caution, and this is huge. Don't let doing all these things get in the way of flying the airplane. So don't drop the airplane to fly the radios and the avionics. So that's just a big thing that we are always watching out for. And some airplanes like the Cirrus have some pretty high level and various levels of automation. You need to know what is the appropriate level of automation for the phase you're in right now. If you get a last minute runway change, it's time to back off and hand fly.
Yep.
Yeah. Anyway.
Cool. And let me just make a quick announcement too for anybody that came in late. We're doing the biggest deal we've ever done on our app. $100 off tonight if you click the link or use the code SOPs. It's private course, instrument course. It is written, flight training, oral prep, good brush up. If you got a flight review coming up, you can check it out. There's a free trial if you want to see it all. And if you just don't want to buy it, but you want our checklist, just bypass the payment and go right to the references resource library. There's a checklist in there that goes over SOPs.
And I'll say this, and Jason's not paying me, and I'm done sharing if you want to take that down. I will say this. Once again, Jason's not paying me, but what I really like about what you've done. Now, I was listening.
I might after you say this. It was good.
You're not. I was listening to Jason's podcast before we had YouTube. I mean, he's been doing this that long, and it's just some fantastic content. If you're driving a long drive to work, do it. But what's really good about his app over a lot of others is that he's showing you live in-flight video, like you're in the airplane with him doing this stuff. And I think your training is outstanding.
Thank you. Thanks, Brian. It's great to hear that we're putting all of our heart and soul into it.
Because you can demo. You're demoing things in the airplane and seeing it's worth 1,000 words.
Yeah, and you know what's funny? I mean, I don't want to go on endlessly about the app, but we're adding the flying videos to the instrument side right now.
That's cool.
And there's no requirement for us to do it. There's ground training in there. You got unlimited practice tests. We got oral prep in there. Like, we're good to go.
Yeah.
But I spent all last week in the airplane with this giant filming rig. And my one thought was like, this is the stuff. Like, this is the stuff that I really want to teach. This is the gold. It's the flying part of it, which we have no real prescribed mission there. It's just sort of bonus. But that's the stuff that gives me the most joy, honestly.
Yeah, and you can tell it because you're passionate about it. And you find good ways to teach it. It's like we're not going to get into the lift equation and do some heavy duty math. We're gonna look through this hole in the windshield right here and draw a line there and say this is where your eye needs to be and use your peripheral. There's a great teaching technique there, but that's also, I think it fits into everything. The secrets to flying safety are keeping it simple and teaching in a way and explaining things in a way that people understand. Someone said to repeat the advisory circular. It's 91-73B.
9173B. Awesome. Yeah. And that to segue back to the SOPs, and I really appreciate you saying that about my stuff in the app. One of the hard parts is like diligence, making sure that your brain is really doing it and that you're not just jumping through the hoops. And early when we first started this talk tonight, I mentioned the final walk around.
Yeah.
But I'll never forget once I was at Dallas Love Field in a DA-20 and there was a storm coming and I'm doing my walk around and my fiance was in the plane and we're on our way to New Orleans and I'm doing the walk around, only the plane's over here and I'm looking at the storm. So I literally walked around the whole airplane without looking at it. And that was my final walk around,
the pretty lights.
Yeah. And I missed 2 cowl plugs with a red flag sticking out of a white airplane. I actually, it's one of those moments where, you really learn something. Fortunately, I was lucky. And when I added power for takeoff, they were ejected from the plane and I saw them and the tower saw them and I aborted the takeoff.
Those we were stuck blow in Texas at about 2,200 RPM.
Yeah, something like that. And, well, we were stuck in Texas for almost 2 weeks. And, and there's so much to learn there, right? Like the external pressure of needing to get out of Dallas that fast, so fast that if we missed this takeoff window, we were going to be stuck there for 2 weeks. And that was huge pressure. Yeah. And because the pressure was on my mind, I'm doing an SOP that theoretically is designed to catch the problem, but I'm not really doing it. I'm just going through the motions, Yeah.
Anything that's forcing you to rush is a precursor to an accident. You're setting yourself up. That should be a big red flag.
Yeah. Yeah. And the idea that, to your point about diligence, it's not hard the first 10 times. It's hard the 10,320th time. That's when it's like when it inside and out, to bring your full attention to bear on a simple task at hand is not easy.
Yeah. As a fast team rep, I was giving remedial training to somebody who did a gear up landing on accident. He was asked to do a short approach, and he put the gear, it was an airplane that had a neutral position for the gear lever. He put it to neutral instead of down. And so he, the FAA said, okay, we're bringing you back into compliance, go fly with this FAA safety team rep. And so that was me. And I flew with him. And I said, do you religiously do the gump check? He goes, oh yeah. I said, all right, let's do it. First landing, we're downwind. I said, do your gump check. And he says, gear. I'm like, okay. If you did it that way, it still would have helped, but he obviously hadn't been doing it. So we did, about, I don't know, 30 takeoffs and landings over a course of several lessons. And in every time it was a gump check and a final gump check. Yeah. And then I taught him something else that was really important, is when I said, here, I want you to do something. He was number one, clear to land. And I said, I want you to continue downwind. And he says, okay, but shouldn't I be turning base about now? I said, just continue downwind. Just watch what happens. Let's let this play out. And we're continuing downwind. And finally the tower says, yeah, you can turn anytime, you're clear to land. And he says, Roger. I said, just Roger, that's all. And he's getting all nervous and fidgety, like he thinks he's, violating the hand of God. When ATC clears you to land, you need to go turn. I said, continue downwind. So ATC finally comes on and asks us, so how long are you going to go downwind? and I said, about another mile. And they said, okay. Yeah. And he goes, I had no idea you could just do that. It was like a light went off. Yeah. He's flying the airplane. Yeah. Not ATC. Right. You're in charge of it.
Yeah, for sure. And another thing too, I want to point out, at least about the SOPs that I teach, is that no one's going to get to 100%, or it's very rare. Like, I don't fly these like, usually when I debrief my own single pilot flight, I'll think back and, realize, oh, I missed this or I missed that. When I fly with students, I have this little shorthand that I use to keep track of, if they're doing or backing up all of their checklists, basically. So I expect them to do a flow check and a checklist for every climb, level off, and descent. So if there's an opportunity for a climb and I'm out on a flight, like the first climb of the day, I'll put an up arrow, right? There's our climb. If my student does a flow check, I circle it. And if there's a written checklist backed up, it gets across. Then we level off, he forgets. Then we climb again. Then we level off, right? And then we descend, then we level off. There's a finite number of climbs, level offs, and descents. And what it should look like is all of them, circled. But at the end of the day, it sort of looks like this. At the end of the day, I can say, well, you hit 50% of your checklists, but only 2 of them were backed up. And it's not a big deal. What I want everyone watching to take away from that is 75% success is a great day. If you're trying for 100%, you'll probably operate at the 75% level. If you don't try at all, I promise you're down in the 10s, 8% of the opportunities, 10% of the opportunities.
But falling short of 100
pilots don't even pick up the checklist in flight at all. They just pick it up after landing or before takeoff, whatever.
Yeah, and falling short of 100% is not failing.
No, that's the thing. I want everyone to get comfortable with that. Is like, don't beat yourself up if you realize, holy cow, I only got 70% of my checklist. It's like, you were going for 100 and you cared about 100 enough to do what I just showed you for 75% of the opportunities on a single pilot flight. You're winning. You're really winning.
Yeah. And interestingly, your circle and ticks look a lot like what we do when we're crossing the Atlantic on an oceanic flight and we're checking waypoints. We circle it when we verify it. Yeah. We circle it when we verified it. We put a slash mark through when we've confirmed it, and then another one when we've crossed it and done a position report. So it looks a lot like that. Reminded me of that. But those kind of techniques and having a system, that's the important part. Having a system.
Yeah. And it's like, so we can have, with a student, I'll have this conversation like that we're having in a limited way, or actually these days it's all in the app. So I'll just tell them to watch it. But they'll be on board with the idea. Like, okay, Jason, I understand why this is important in a single pilot world. I understand why I need to hit all those checklists or whatever. And most people are shocked. After that conversation, we'll go to the airplane and primacy will kick in and they'll do what they do. And on our very first flight, I won't nag them. On the very first flight, I just want to see what's going to happen. They hit very, very few. I think most pilots would be shocked at how few they're actually hitting. So.
And if you're worried about not being able to discipline yourself into doing these every time, come fly with me.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot of things, like you say, discipline through, what is it, trauma or
Training by trauma.
Training by trauma. So what I do, and I think I learned this from my instructor as well, is one of the techniques or SOPs is to keep your hand on the throttle during the takeoff roll and the initial climb out, because they can migrate back.
100%.
Keep your hand on it. If a student takes their hand off, I pull it back.
Yeah, me too. Yeah, the minute their hand comes off, power comes out. Yeah.
So they quickly learn not to take their hand off the throttle. And if you're one of those pilots in a single engine airplane who sets full power and then is doing this,
yeah,
I'm going to say shame on you, but that's technique. It's technique only. But if you're flying with me, we're going to talk about it.
Yeah, 100%. And this is all like a lot of these things that you and I are touching on this evening. I think the word like airmanship keeps coming to mind. You know, that vague idea that you're not just driving a plane car through the sky. You're an aviator. You're flying a machine. You have to learn some level of discipline and airmanship, and you have to think about this activity a little bit differently.
And you just said something that also almost matches one of the things I say, is that, you know, pilots who crash airplanes get into that airplane like you and I get into our car.
Yeah.
And like you said, you don't just drive a plane car. I love that, because you have to have some airmanship. You always have to be asking what if. When I drive a car, I'm brain dead. I mean, I can listen to a book while I'm driving a car. I could no sooner listen to an audio tape or a book while I'm flying an airplane, because I'm constantly worrying, where's that next threat? Not that I'm scared, a little bit of fear, but I'm looking for that next thing that's going to come at me constantly.
Yeah, it's funny. It's, you know, maybe it's woven into our personalities. Nothing upsets me more than when I go to like a kid's birthday party and one of my kids hurts themselves on a danger that I missed.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Because like I'm that guy, the first thing I see in the room is everything that could possibly go wrong.
Well, yeah, that's like my wife. So I set my glass right on the edge of the table, and she'll move it. She'll put it back in the middle, because that's called threat. That's threat and error management. I put it back right on the edge just to drive her nuts. And I did that one time. I did knock it off on accident, joking around.
Right. Well, we got through a lot of stuff tonight. I kind of want to open it up for questions just to see where this goes. I don't want everybody being here, having to stay longer than they need to. A reminder to everybody that you get $100 off using the SOP code tonight. We have SOPs in our ground school app, and we also have a free checklist. If you aren't going to get the app, still get the checklist. And let's see what we've got. There's a few starred questions here. Let's see. Oh, sorry. If you already have your private and instrument rating, does this app make financial sense? Was one of the questions. If you're talking about our ground school app, it really depends on how long you want it. There's a monthly plan for $50. But even if you bought the app for a year, like if you paid for the app for a year, that's like a little more than an hour of my time. Like if you were to come fly with me. And I think if you're already certificated, the two biggest values of the app are the flying videos that Brian mentioned, where it's like we've got the cameras mounted at the student eye level, and I'm in the plane with you, and there's briefings and debriefings. I think any pilot could benefit from some of the stuff that you see in there. There's also a feature we've built called knowledge recall, where, you know how like when you're trying to learn things and they're hard to remember, visibility cloud clearance requirements, certain airspace laws, or like what is that class Gulf that goes above, a certain altitude, right? Those things are hard to remember. And in our app, when you complete a chapter, just like in real life, 90 days later, you have to demonstrate currency or proficiency. In our app, we keep track of things you haven't looked at in a long time. And when your recall fades, we will prompt you with a short quiz and say, hey, it's been a while since you looked at regulations, or it's been a while since you looked at airspace. Take a short quiz and just recharge your knowledge. That kind of thing might be good. And I guess lastly, the mock oral feature going into a flight review. So we've built this mock oral where I sit there and on video and ask you questions. We've tied every question to the ACS. So if you go through our mock oral and you're honest with yourself and you study your mistakes, you're bulletproof on an oral, on a flight review, on anything. So for anybody that's a certificated pilot, I would just say check it out, get the free trial, and decide. Go to that flight tab first, decide if it's for you or not. But I think so. We hear a lot from CFIs that are getting a lot out of it, from pilots of all levels. So I would check it out. These are worthy of wings credit. Al, thank you so much. You do get wings credit for being here tonight. Jacob, you might have to remind me exactly how we do that, the mechanics of that. I think it's good, right? We don't have to like ask for a code or anything, because StreamYard knows that you guys were here. So if there are people wanting wings credit, you will get wings credit for being here tonight.
I'm posting some fun little SOP bullet points in the chat just because we don't have time to get through them all. But I'm putting little bullets that I've collected over the years in the chat, so you can go back and look at that.
That's awesome.
These are all going to be in the PFOM, the Personal Flight Operations Manual.
I like it. Can't find the $100 deal, Scott. Jacob, will you verify that there's a download this link button? Is that what people are seeing? Like underneath the viewer window, do you guys see a download the app, or get ground school? It should say get ground school on it.
Hey, Jason, are you offering Wings credit for this? I see a lot of people mentioning that.
Yes. Yep.
So Wings they're getting Wings credit for this, right?
Attendees? Yeah, they are.
Yep. Okay. Awesome.
100%. And let me show you guys too. Anybody who's having trouble with the code, I think I can show you. Oops, that's the wrong thing. In our app, let's see, where was it? Oh, here. I can show you the buy screen and how to put the code in. I think it's, oops, that didn't work. Maybe it won't work. All right. Well, anyway, on the subscription screen in small text at the bottom, it says enter code. So you might have to do that. Or if you used the link I described, the get ground school underneath your window, the code will already be in there. It'll just be automatic. So let's see what else. Headwind, crosswind, ceiling, and visibility was what we were talking about, Stephen.
So I saw someone ask, if you already have your private and instrument rating, does this app make financial sense? I think any continuing training you do, that's one of the things that the airlines we do is continuing training. We have continuing qualification training. Even though I'm already an ATP and I'm already type rated in that airplane, I have to keep training on it. I have to keep learning systems. I have to keep training on instrument procedures and keep currency. I think if you get one of these training apps to get your rating, even though you've already got it, it's great for review and recurrent training, regular recurrent training.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. It's so important.
I'm not saying that to make people buy your app, but I mean,
well, no, sense. That's why we did the recall feature. I mean, honestly, I was on the fence. Like, is that going to be annoying for people? Or like, we still probably should have a way to turn it on or off for those people that want excellence and those that don't. Just kidding.
Right. Right.
But
like saying, yeah, I'm already instrument rated. Should I keep learning about flying instruments? Because I don't know at all.
Yeah, and it's so important. I mean, I was saying to somebody the other day that when I get bored of teaching, which doesn't happen very often, but I'll go get a lesson in a twin. That's sort of my my escape, flying like a 310 or a Baron or 320, something like that. It's challenging. It's different than what I normally do. But I think keeping your mind engaged, you know, like at whatever level of flying you're at is really important.
Yeah, I still learn something new every time. I keep attending wing seminars and presentations, and I learn more. And I even some forums on Facebook or whatever groups, you see people asking questions like, wow, that's a good question. And it makes me dig into it. So that continuing curiosity, it's huge.
Yeah, that's true. I agree. I'm just rolling through these questions because none of them are standing out exactly. Let me see if I can find any else. If you have a question you're burning to ask, you should just type it in again. I love that too. Someone loves your 7 senses, 5 senses plus plain sense and spidey sense.
Yeah, I love that. Spidey sense is one, and I always show in a lot of my presentations of if you've seen the movie Over the Hedge, there's that little Vern the turtle that says, "My tail is tingling," and when my tail tingles, boy, so when your tail tingles, don't go, listen to it. It's the spidey sense, same thing.
Yeah, and yeah, anybody looking for the checklist too, remember what we said at the beginning. You have to update the content from the server or you won't see it in there for a couple days. So it was just recently added. So if you are looking for the checklist, go under the gear icon, scroll down until you see update content from server. That actually reaches out and grabs the latest and greatest, the stuff we fixed today and everything else. Otherwise, it takes a day or two to push over. Remember, there's ground and flight, and you want to go to the flight side. SOPs is where all that lives.
All right. Keep your eye out for when I finish this personal flight ops manual with Jason's assistance. He'll put something out indicating that it's out, and so just keep an eye on all his content, because when we finish it, he'll put something out. You'll get it, and it'll be customizable for your situation, so you can edit it and then save it as a PDF and put it on your iPad.
Oh, that's great! I can't wait for that. That's really great. Yeah. Honestly, I've wanted something like that. I should, it's.
Well, we've talked about it like a couple of years ago.
Doing it. Yeah, it's like since I wrote Setting the Standard, I think it was like somewhere in there like what you should really have is an ops manual. But in reality, I don't know that I'm well positioned to do it. Like it takes somebody who understands what an ops manual is. And I think what I teach is more standard operating procedure that sort of fits into the operations manual, right? It's like a subset.
Absolutely. A lot of what you teach is what's going to be in there, and the task will be, and I understand, like, oh God, don't make this like an airline thing. It won't be. It's just the skeleton is like an airline thing just because it's a policy manual, but it's going to be tailored definitely for general aviation for single pilot GA flying.
Yeah, awesome. That's great. Let me see if I'm missing any brand new questions that came in. Everybody knows they're getting wings credit for being here tonight. Looking forward to the ops manual, says Bradley.
Ross says, do you advocate using EFB based
checklists?
checklists?
And who said that? I'm sorry. Go ahead. What did you say, Brian?
Yeah, no, Ross asked, do you advocate using and have your students been successful using EFB-based checklists? That's a good question because the paper is reliable. It's always there, but your thumb can skip over something. I like the EFB-based checklist if a pilot becomes proficient with it. So you've got to practice with it ahead of time, using it and knowing how to use it, but you can easily check over something and check something as long as you're checking it when you really mean it. Don't just check it to get it done. Because a lot of times I'll see people check things. Yeah, I did that. Yeah. Make sure you actually do it. So I'm a proponent of it as long as you're proficient with it.
Yeah, and I would also say that if you are relying on the EFB, this isn't exactly a standard operating procedure, but my ops manual would specify you're not allowed to do that unless you have a charging cable in the airplane so that you can plug the EFB in and charge it while you're flying. It's just way too risky to rely that much on it and then get in one day with 20% battery and all that stuff's gone.
Right. And per the 91 advisory circular about the EFBs, the pilot in command has to ensure that it does not interfere with any of the aircraft systems. Mm-hmm. I once was on a flight. My dad and I were flying from San Diego back up to Santa Monica. And on the way down, we didn't have our iPad plugged in. On the way back up, we plugged it into a external battery to charge it. And during that flight, we couldn't hear ATC, just nothing but static on the radio.
Yeah.
And I don't know how I figured it out. I had just a bug popped into my head and I just unplugged the iPad from the battery and all of a sudden the radios work just fine. So make sure you have a battery that's, Sporty sells good ones that have been approved, but make sure they're shielded and don't interfere with your radios.
Yeah. And like to your point earlier, I guess what I want to say about that is the EFBs don't always work. And I think it's important to remember that. And one of the things I was telling you guys, we were filming last week for the instrument course. Well, one of the things that kept happening while I was out there filming is every now and again, the geo-referencing would just disappear on my iPad. But I kept that. We're going to actually make that part of one of the lessons because there's a reason the EFB isn't certified. It's not certified equipment. It's not certified in the airplane. I didn't lose the airplane on my moving map when I lost it on my iPad, but again, that's certified equipment. This is not certified equipment on the MFD. So it's important to remember that. It's important to remember that this is like a bonus. And if you are a private owner, you own your own airplane, this is what I was going to show you, is that to Brian's point earlier about what's on the checklist, like what's on there's like what I call white noise on a climb checklist. Like, did you put in your FMS course? It's like, that shouldn't be on a climb checklist. That's aeronautical stuff that I should be doing. So if you look at the way that this is really the climb, cruise, and descent checklist is power, mixture, at least in a Cessna 172, compass to HI, and engine gauges. You could add maybe fuel selector and cowl flaps to that, and it would cover every airplane there is. So if you can simplify some of the checklists and have them be more meaningful, I would go ahead and do that. And if you're a private owner, you could certainly take something like that and put it up on the panel on a nice little black or gold background, make it engraved. And then over time, with just a glance of your eyes, you're redundant. So like when you're coming in, let's say you own a Bonanza, you've got that little checklist, that configuration change checklist placarded on your panel, you can level off, take a guess at it with your flow check, go around the room, set power, set cowl flaps, do all these things, and then look back up at the panel and check right there with a glance of your eyes. There's nothing to pull out. There's no EFB to tap. You just see it right there in the panel. So for private owners and critical checklists like that, I really like what we used to do in the 70s and just write it on the panel. Like some of those older airplanes have it all written.
Yeah, that's like teaching in the Pipers because before landing, before takeoff checklists are printed on.
Yeah.
And then you get up and cruise. Like I just pull a glare shield down.
Yeah. I mean, it's beautiful, right?
It hasn't
Same
worn
with the
off.
Mooney.
You can see the cruise.
All your power settings on the
Yeah.
glare. Yeah. I mean, it's
but
helpful.
having something that handy will make you use it more.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
And all right. Well, hey, Brian, we've done an hour and 10 minutes. I don't want to keep you any longer. I know you're on Central Time. I want to thank you so much for coming tonight. I always learn stuff when I talk to you, and it's an honor to have you on the show. So thank you for making the time.
I enjoy it. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it. And thanks for everybody for showing up.
Yeah. Thanks to everybody who was here. Really appreciate it. You'll get Wings credit. If you have any questions, just let us know. We've got a team of about 7 CFIs over at support@learnthefinerpoints.com. If you have questions about the app or questions about content, don't hesitate to send us an email. So, all right, I guess that's it. I'm going to let Jacob give us our that's a wrap music, and we'll see you guys next month. Oh, before I leave, let me say next month, RH from Opposing Bases on May 21st. We're going to talk air traffic control and find out if they actually do have a light that goes on when Brian starts doing stuff. So we'll find out. All right, you guys, thanks so much for being here. Have a great evening.
Good night.